Hey, it's Simon from Difference in Skill, and I'm bringing you as you can see right here, I have a SP Pacifica. So I'll be bringing you a kind of deck discussion on Bermuda triangles. I guess you guys can consider it a 101, or I kind of think of it more as a deck comparison type. So I'll be talking about a lot of Bermuda triangle stuff today, and hopefully this video would actually help people in constructioning their deck or understanding how the Bermuda Triangle client will work. So I'm not very prepared for this, so it's probably going to be a long video, and I'll probably be pointing out things here and there in random orders. So if you guys do like this type of video, I can do future videos of this type of stuff for different clients. But let's start with Bermuda Triangle first. So this is my favorite card, Pacifica. Obvious reason. Lollies are good cards. Pretty much the whole reason why I play this clan. Well, and girls. But yeah, Pacifica, in my opinion, best Bermuda Triangle ever. So I guess to begin with, I'll just start off with talking about some of the different decks. So obviously I point out here, or not really, but Pacifica kind of has her own deck, which I have, which is the main Bermuda Triangle build I play. And as you can see, my sleeve here is actually the same artist by a person who drew Pacifica. So okay, so first deck here, I have, well, not really in any order, but I'll talk about stars in a bit, but this is a deck geared towards using Pacifica. And then second here, if should move the camera angle a bit. I have a second deck here. This deck focuses on using the ride chain Bermuda Triangle, Riviere. So two different type of deck right here, and then also a third type of deck, or not really third type, but more like the more popular build, which I don't actually have a deck of, would make use of the Reindeer card. So this would be the ace card of a different build. So basically the Reindeer build, I have a Pacifica build here, and also the Riviere build. If anybody actually wants me to, I can kind of put together a Reindeer deck, and I can do a deck profile on that. And lastly, there's also another ace card, or ace Vanguard, kind of more cards you would kind of be considering as Vanguard more often, would be this one, Princess Lena, except this card is actually just very similar to the Pacifica build, but I find that in general that out of all the aces, main Vanguard cards, she kind of is put behind the spot, really. Like, not really consider a main build, but still you can still make a deck around her, really. So I'll start by talking about the deck which I think is in the meta right now would be the most competitive, and that is sadly not Pacifica, would be Riviere actually. So the reason why I think this is the most competitive deck out of all the different builds is that the playstyle first is actually just the playstyle of this deck being very aggressive, or not exactly I guess aggressive is a good word for it, but in Vanguard in general, everything's kind of aggressive. So we'll talk about the ride chain first, which I have kind of stacked together like a cheater. Okay, so first of all, if anybody doesn't know the ride chain, so 1, 2, 3. And what basically happens is that the bonus effect of her ride chain is that when you do a successful ride, you get to draw a card for each successful ride of a level up. So in total, if you manage to pull off the entire ride chain, and Riviere Grade 3 is shining like a boss, which I will. Okay, I guess that's better. Oh well. Okay. So back to, pretty typical is for most ride chain, put a level 1 on top, level 0, top 7, find 2 or 3. And for her bonus effect is when you put a 2 on top of the 1, you get to draw a card, and same with 3 on the 2. So this gives you a +3 like most of the ride chain. I think the only exception is a seal being not really a plus, but very good effect. But anyway, so this gives you your hand advantage if you pull off a solo ride. Also gaining you a 11k Vanguard when you have the Grade 2 Riviere inside your soul. And in addition, her effect, she has a Persona Blast ability. So it's an on hit effect. So when she hits the Vanguard, you can discard a copy of herself. So Persona Blasting and Counter Blast 2, and she basically has a Soul Savior effect. So you can choose up to 3 Bermuda units and give them additional 5,000 attack for the rest of the turn. So this really makes it makes the deck go can hit high numbers and really just rush down your opponent with trying to aim at magic numbers and so on. So as I was saying before, why I think this deck is the most competitive is just because that in not specifically speaking of the TCG meta, especially in the OCG meta where there's 13k Vanguards, and in a month or so we're going to be seeing basically a 13k format soon. So hitting 18 on every column is very important for really in general the meta now. So pretty much all decks are trying to aim at 18 columns, and in a sense whatever decks being able to set up your 18 columns easier is in a way top tier, which is why the Alfred Royal Paladin build nowadays is really good in the OCG format anyway. It's really good in the TCG format as well, actually. So basically in this deck, you actually just make use of a lot of regular beat sticks. So this is actually one of the more the other Grade 3 or Ace, very important card in this clan or in this deck in my opinion, because Bermuda actually kind of lacks a lot of support in many ways, not having any 12k beaters and no Palamedas, but nobody has Palamedas besides Royals. So this is kind of closest thing to Palamedas you get for paying a cost. You can give it an additional 3,000 when it attacks. So hitting 18 can become very easy with this card, like just about any booster behind, unless it's a 4k, which is very unlikely because those events are that you misride to get this behind that to hit only maximum of 17, which is still a good number because there's Majesty Lord out there. So 17 and 18s are still good, but of course with the upcoming all 13k out Vanguard soon for every main character deck, it's going to be very important that hitting 18s. So basically, even if it's not hitting 18, if you put a column with something like this helps you hit 21, and because the deck is very counter blast efficient, being that the Vanguard only uses 2, and more or less in many ways it's you don't see that effect happening very often. Like, you don't see Riviere's effect being used very often because any smart opponent would know that having a Soul Savior boost to your units would be very dangerous, so they would tend to guard for it, or would always try and guard for her, so this applies a lot of pressure, which I probably didn't mention before, but this is good because of you have 11k base, and basically when you have 11k base, the rest of the deck running like 7k boosters, you can hit 18 a bit easier, but if not, let's just say you have to put an AK behind because you misride or whatnot. And so that really helps. So it still puts a lot of pressure because if especially when you have good columns where you're hitting for 18 or even like 18 here, 17 or whatnot, the Soul Savior effect really puts a lot of pressure on your opponent, especially if they don't have many cards in their hand, and because it happens after you hit, if you have any triggers, then a lot of time it puts your opponent at a spot where they wouldn't be able to block unless they have a lot of cards in their hand. So really, because this deck really mixes use of these cards to help you set up for columns of 18 easier. The other card would be Flute, trying to help you set up for 18 a bit easier because this becomes a 11k when there's 4 other Bermuda triangles. So any 7k booster would work. And basically, for the way I built this deck is that all the grade 1 boosters are either all 7k or 8k. The specific build does run Pearl Sister, but I actually don't really prefer it. I actually prefer running, as I just stressed on the whole 18 column thing, I actually rather run Aqua, Top Out Aqua, which is the 10k beater, in this deck instead. But this deck is actually not mine, so I kind of built it to preference to the owner wanting to run the Pearl Sister because he feels that because if I put this deck into an all-out 18 column setup kind of deck, it doesn't very feel like a Bermuda Triangle, as he liked to say, which is kind of true in many ways because the cover really shows the Pearl Sisters and the kind has a lot of bouncing kind of effect, and this deck really doesn't make use of any of that kind of stuff. That's why I guess in many ways this is more like a straight up vanilla beat down kind of deck, with the Vanguard having some spice where it gives a lot of nice pressure. Oh, and you have the Ride Chain giving you a +3 possibility, but not always possible because it is a Ride Chain, so when you misride, it's not always possible to get your +3. But yeah, that's kind of the disadvantage of this deck in many ways, because if you don't run any of the other cards that kind of help you give advantage, so let's say the Pearl Sister combo, which we'll talk about later if anybody doesn't know, or stuff like this card here, Karine. And for anybody who doesn't know, I'll just quickly tell you that she does give you a +1 if she returns to your hand, but I'll talk about that in a bit because it doesn't really concern this build. And because it doesn't really make use of any of the bouncing kind of effects for this deck, arguably some people think that this doesn't feel like a Bermuda Triangle deck, but you know, Bermuda Triangles are just girls, idols, so there's plenty of that in this deck, so don't feel discouraged for the people. This is actually a very good deck still, like not my favorite, but I do consider this deck a very solid deck. Somewhere it's just it feels kind of bland because you don't get to, it's very straight up, it's kind of traditional beatdown. That's why some people might not like it, and because I have many decks already that are kind of like beat down, I don't really prefer this build. But in general, Vanguard is that beat down builds are actually quite good. Actually, I should do a video talking about the meta, but I'm not really confident in discussing about the entire meta. But if maybe in the future. So this is the first deck I just talked about, the Riviere deck, which uses the first starter here. So we have that cover. Alright, so moving on to the best Bermuda Triangle card ever. Best deck ever. Pacifica. So this build makes use of the starter. I think it's Bermuda Cat that window. And her ability, for anybody who doesn't know, is you can move this card into your soul at any point of the game on your turn, main phase, and you can select up to one Bermuda Triangle on the field and put it back into your hand. So why is this good, or how is it helpful in the Bermuda Triangle? So as I described earlier, oh no, the cards. As I described earlier, Bermuda Triangle makes use of a lot of kind of bouncing your cards back in your hand, which will give you some sort of advantage, because the effects kind of trigger when they return to your hand. So what this does is that this is a good starter for this client actually, because and for just about any of the other builds, this would be the most preferred starter in my opinion. Unless you're playing the Ride Chain, so of course you would run the Riviere starter if you were playing the Ride Chain. So that doesn't really apply to that, but I think this would be the best starter for the Bermuda Triangle clan for any other build. That's my opinion, and this is because half the time you would be comboing this card with this card. Okay, so what does this do? This card here, Walker Rio. So her effect is when she returns to your hand, you may activate her effect, which is Counter Blast 1. You soul charge a card and then you draw a card. So basically that's a +1 in all the other type of situation where she would bounce back to your hand. But with the starter, it's actually a break even. But this is good because basically the starter helps you when it breaks even with this card. It basically trades back for a different card, the one you draw in. So yes, the card you draw would be what's would be trading it. You would be trading it for the starter in a sense. That's what I would say. Of course, the disadvantage in doing this is really that you don't know what card you draw. It might be worse than the starter, which I highly doubt, because the worst you can get is probably a draw trigger, or you can kind of consider any trigger kind of a bad draw, because when you draw, you would have triggered that card if you didn't actually draw it on this turn. But because this is a 5k booster, and like I said, I stressed on how important it is to hit magic numbers 18, or if you're playing TCG, it doesn't really matter, because if you're playing TCG, generally 16 is the match. 16 is the current magic number, so still, this wouldn't really hit 16 with any card in front unless it's flute. But for this specific build, I wouldn't run flute. So any card you trade back is good, because you're just getting rid of one card and put it back in your hand, because at some point you would want to replace this anyway, because you wouldn't really want a 5k booster in the back. So it's a good start because it breaks even, as long as you're running the Rock Girl Rio or her grade 3 clone Kami, which is common. But yes, it will break even, but there are also many other situations you can make use of this card to give you an advantage, especially like although not that often, if you have a bad field setup, this does help you kind of fix it up at the cost of minusing 1 though. but it's still good because most of the time you would replace this anyway. And I'm back, and wow, the first 20 minutes sure went by fast. Well, long video like I said. So anyway, picking up from where I left off, or kind of where I'm trying to find myself. So I'm going to talk about the ace of this deck and how why it's actually. So this is the Pacifica build, but you can also actually replace Pacifica and use Lena instead, or you can actually run them both. But I don't really prefer mixing both of them, and in that case I wouldn't really run too many Lenas. But anyway, so maybe I'll try to pick up a little bit speed here. So for those of you who don't know, what Pacifica does, her effect is that you soul charge one every turn, and you get to draw a card. Then you put one card in your hand back to the bottom of your deck. Wow, voice sucks. So that's your first ability, which is in other words, it's kind of an air mode for every turn. And in case you guys don't know what air mode does, is basically what I just described, except his effect activates when you hit. So air mode is when you hit, you ditch one card from your hand and then you draw one. That shit is even better because you actually recycle a card back to your bottom of your deck, which you can actually use later in the game again if you get that far. But anyway, so basically you get to flush out one card every turn, which helps a lot in this deck because the ability to flush out your cards helps you gather the units that you need very quickly, or at a lot faster pace than you would normally do so. And this is very helpful for this deck because Bermuda Triangle in general, besides the Ride Chain, is a very heavy setup gimmick kind of deck. A lot on hit effects and a lot of cards that you need and require to set up the field to basically get your pressure game going on. So anyway, that's her first skill. Her second ability is when she has 4 or more weird guards, she gains an additional 3k when she attacks. So this is very good because you don't need a booster half the time, and you can still hit a cross-ride unit if you really need to. The other thing is that just about any booster would help you hit 18. And I hope I didn't already mention that because I might have looped myself here, because I ended up talking to myself for a bit when the video ended at its limit, at the max time limit. And her third ability is a Mega Blast, which very, very rare occurrence that you'll ever use it, but does happen sometimes. So her Mega Blast is when she hits. So this actually accounts for your Weird Guard and Vanguard Pacifica. So when it hits, do your Mega Blast. So Soul Blast 8, Counter Blast 5. Choose 3 units from your deck and place them out on the field again. So in the standing position as well. So basically, if let's say if you did this with all your attacks finish and the last attack miraculously let you do a Mega Blast ability, then you basically gain 2 additional new attacks, one with a booster and one without. So 2 more attacks if you do a Mega Blast. Alright. So now I'll move on to Lena, which is kind of her replacement. So her ability is same for Sakuya for the Oracle Think Tank starter. Not starter. Grade 3 Vanguard that comes in the starter deck. For you TCG guys, you guys might not know it since it's not out yet, but for OCG gamers, it comes in a starter deck, and what it does is when you ride her out on the field, so when you ride this card, Princess Lena, on the field, you get to return every card on the field back to your hand. And that's good. This is actually better than OTT in terms of how you use this ability, because I probably already talked about it earlier about cards such as Rio and Kami over here. Is when they return back to your hand, you get advantage because you get a +1 when they bounce back to your hand. Not including with the exception of the starter being that is a break even. But anyway, so if you have, let's say if you were OP and you had maybe 3 of these on the field. Okay, let's say you were OP and you had 3 of these field. You ride this over, and you suddenly am able to activate 3 counterblasts, and you get 3 free cards out of nowhere. So hand advantage. So that's one of the. So basically, that's what you can do with that card. And the other one is Pearl Sisters, which, if you guys don't know, need to require a lot of resetting up. So, and what I mean by resetting up is that the Pearl Sisters here, I do run them. Pearl Sisters here, for those of you who don't know, they do form a picture. They do form a picture. For the Pearl Sister effect is that for Pearl, when she attacks a Vanguard, a successful attack on the Vanguard, so when you hit, you can Soul Blast 1 and return 1 card in the field back to your hand. So basically, this is good because you can select one of these and bounce them back to your hand, and you get another +1 out of nowhere. Now her counterpart, the sister, Prey, her ability is when she is placed on the field, so choose 1 Pearl, and she gains the following ability for this turn. When she hits the Vanguard, you may Soul Charge 1 and draw a card. So also another +1 kind of card, but the disadvantage is that, or the thing is that her ability is only active for 1 turn. So when you place her on the field and you select your Pearl, it's her ability is only active for until the end of your turn. So a lot of times is actually when you pull a successful Pearl Sister attack on the Vanguard, you would return the other sister back in your hand so you can use it for next turn again, or something along the lines of that. And basically the cost, they kind of break even themselves because she Soul Charges 1 to let you draw a card, and then she uses Soul Blast 1 to return a card. So basically it's kind of costless when you think of it like that. But anyway, like I said, you can also choose to bounce one of these cards, giving you additional benefits and giving you card advantage, hand advantage. Okay. So it might have already occurred to people why I'm saying that. So back to the 2 Ace Vanguard here, Princess Lena and Pacifica. So it might occur to you people, or some people who may be paying attention, is that why I think Pacifica is a better card is that having a field of Pearl Sister and Rios and Carmies is in general a lot of setting up, a lot of work on how you set up your field and so on. So if you don't have these cards in your hand to begin with, riding Princess Lena wouldn't really help if you don't have them. So really, I like the Pacifica engine a lot better because it helps you draw these cards into your hand at the exchange of cards that you don't need in your hand. So when you have too many of Carmies, you can put them back and draw something else and hopefully get a Pearl Sister or a booster or anything. While on the other hand, Princess Lena is most of the time is that on the turn you ride it, if you're lucky, you might have a Pearl Sister on the field. Assuming that it has not died yet by your opponent's hand, or if your opponent notice that at early game you don't really have a full good hand because you don't really have a large hand right off the start of the game, so your opponent might target the Pearl Sisters and you might not be able to defend for them. So if that was the case and the Pearl Sisters aren't on the field, riding Lena wouldn't really help you because then they wouldn't be there anymore. But let's say you were OP and you had them on the field, now you can reset up the Pearl Sister combo, or if you have a Rio there and you ride that, you also get some additional benefits for having them bounce. But of course, this requires a lot of setup, and half the time or more or less, you wouldn't really have this type of feel at the right when you ride to grade 3, you would have to be sacking very hard. So to actually make use of her effect is actually you play this in later game where you already have a lot of these cards. So if you play a build with 4 Lenas, you'll find yourself rewriting over it a lot of times. And let's say you only had 1 Rio and you had to rewrite to use her ability. That's kind of pointless now, because that doesn't actually give you a hand advantage anymore, because you break even when you ride. It's a -1 because that card you ride, because if you have a grade 3 on the field and you ride over again, this could have been a booster, or this could have been a beater, I mean. But of course it's not too bad because you have the Pearl Sister combo and so on. So it does kind of give you a bit more benefit than OTT, as I would like to say, because in OTT you kind of just ride it. If you re-ride or you override it, you don't really get advantage for bouncing all your cards back unless you're playing Dark Cat, but Dark Cat doesn't really give you advantage because you also give your opponent advantage by giving them card 2, right? So slightly better because you have the Pearl Sister combo and so on. And the other thing is it lets you reset up your field. So that's very beneficial, especially if you kind of screwed up and set up a bad field. Then having that helps you fix your field is a kind of good thing. But in general, you don't really screw up with setting up your field most of the time, or you try not to. Or really, I find myself not really having that kind of trouble where my field becomes very horrible unless I'm kind of forced to play it out like that. And especially when you play Pacifica, you really kind of just get the cards you need in general, unless you're being really unlucky and you draw all triggers. But either way, even if you have all triggers, you can shuffle them back into yet newer units. So still, this is why I prefer Pacifica over Lena. And it's not like that. It's not really because they can't work together in this deck. Like, you can run 1 or 2 copies in the deck and try and hope for late game riding, because by the time you accumulate all the cards you need to set up your field, you could actually ride just to gain benefit. But I'll go on to the problem why I kind of don't find any usage for her. So might have already occurred, but the core operation of this deck relies on running this card right here, Karmi. And I guess I'm doing a bit of 101 now. A lot of time I set up this card on the back here, which is actually a key card for this client as well, for this build especially, which I have in another. If you guys want to go for deck profile, I have them up in the channel already, so go check that out if you want to take a look at it, because I'm just going to briefly talk about this. But anyway, this card is kind of the grade 1 booster of... where is it? Oh, shit. Okay, here we go. This is like the grade 1 booster of this card for us. So if anyone doesn't know, if this is on hit effect, when she hits, Soul Boss 2, choose a Bermuda Triangle card on the field and put it back in your hand. This is like a grade 1 version of her, except she's a bit better, of course, because she is the grade 3 version. She can hit any unit and allow you to bounce, allow you to trigger effect by hitting any unit. This card here, you have to hit the Vanguard to trigger effect, slightly at a disadvantage. But I put this behind Pacifica most of the time, or try all the time, because first of all, this hits 18, which is a magic number, important, and this also puts pressure into your opponent, because now they can't take the Vanguard attack freely, or they would be forced to kind of guard your Vanguard a lot of times, which will eat out their hand very fast. So more specifically is you kind of put them in the decision of thinking, oh, I can't block the Vanguard forever, so I have to take the Vanguard. But if I take the Vanguard, I allow him to activate the ability, which would allow me to bounce this card back into my hand, which giving me a +1. Or in general, the setup is that there's always one card in the field that has some benefit in putting it back in my hand. So in a lot of cases like that, it puts a lot of pressure on my opponent, and it hits a good number, which is very good. In general, the other way I set up is that, really honestly, if I have one pearl on one side here, a Karmi here, any booster that hits a nice number, so 18 or something, 17, this can't really hit 18, which is why it's kind of a disadvantage, and why I mainly think that this deck can't really compare to the Riviere build in how competitive it is, because it has trouble setting up a full 18 column, and this card has to hit the Vanguard to trigger its effect. But anyway, in OCG this is very powerful. I can agree that this would be more or less an A tier deck, because now you have this card which can attack anything. I can poke your wheel guard for all I care and take away your units. Now you have to guard for this. If you don't guard for this, I get +1. Oh, you guard for this. Okay, do you want to guard for this? Okay, guard for this as well, because if you let me hit you with this, I also get a +1. And basically all my trigger effects go over here, because this unit has to attack first all the time, because if it returns to your hand, you have to avoid doing that. Because let's say if you attack with that first and they let you hit, you bounce that, you lose an attack. So that's not that good. So you always have to attack with the side, which can be kind of a disadvantage at sometimes, but puts a lot of pressure, because actually if you attack the Vanguard with this card, most of the time they do take the hit for this one, because it's the only free pressure attack. But of course, if you don't want them to get any triggers making it harder for these cards to hit, you can always poke up rear guards, which eats out their units sometimes, and that kind of really pisses people off. Anyway, so that's basically the main strategy in this Pacifica build. It incorporates all the basically Bermuda triangle effects kind of cards. It feels like you're playing Bermuda when you play this deck, as some people would like to say. And basically the core cards is Karmis, and I actually run 4 Karmis over and 2 of Rios, and the reason is that because it's really hard to set up a good column with Rio, especially because the only booster that allows her to hit 16 in, which is a magic number. And in TCG, this is very important as well, is that you need an 8k booster behind this to hit, basically hit the magic number, especially when your opponent's Vanguard is a 11k Vanguard, right? And I don't really prefer running many of these. The reason is because I did build this for OCG, so hitting 16 is basically hitting crap, and I really don't want this to hit any lower, because if this column, or this can be this or anything, I like this because it hits 18. I can actually attack 13k Vanguards. One aside is a Pearl Sister. That's not going to hit 18 no matter what, but that's kind of the loss for using it. So they can 5k guard this if it's a 13k, and if this is not 18, then they can 5k guard that too. But since we're talking about, since it's equally hard to really, or it's equally, the way of probability of putting 8k here is like equal here, I rather run more Karmis instead of Rios, especially when you're forced to actually put one of these on the field. Then your choices are really like, I rather run the card with a higher attack base, because putting forests in the deck is kind of starting to clog up the deck in many ways, like, because you already have 2 different kind of grade 3s, and if you only put 1 or 2 of these, it's not very, you have to kind of move slots out for Pacifica or that, and if you run too little of them, you might never be able to pull off the effects. So then I prefer running Pearl Sisters instead. And also because I have the grade 1 version, so it's like I'm manually making a forest onto the field. Yeah. And that's another 20 minutes, so I'm just gonna let time run out here while I talk about the next set. Okay, I'm back, and so to really wrap things up with the Pacifica build here is that the core cards are really based on the cards that bounces back to your hand, so Karmi, and the ability of the Pearl Sisters to be set up on the field. Not specifically this one, but it's more of a benefit. This is more of a bonus. The core of the deck in strategy is really to use Pacifica with the Forest Clone on the back to try and give you hand advantage by bouncing these cards back in your hand, and also having the ability to flush out your cards or recycle them helps you get rid of cards that you don't need in your hand. So if you have too many grade 3s, is not always a problem because you can flush them out and get other stuff. So declogging your hand in a sense. And basically the strategy is really the advantage is that you have a lot of pressure on this deck, a lot of on-hit pressures on your opponent, forcing them to guard a lot or for almost every attack and make them run out of hand fast. So, or if they don't guard, then you kind of win by overwhelming them with hand advantage, or just simply plussing so much that they can't catch up anymore. So basically, this is what the core of this deck is really just getting a lot of pluses and a lot of pressure on your opponent. Of course, the disadvantage to pressure deck is that, or on hit effects, is that because they have to hit. So if your opponent can somehow rush you down or destroy your setup, then sometimes it can be very hard to pull back, which is also another reason why I run Pacifica actually, because out of all the good lolliness is that even if your setup is destroyed, there's a higher chances of pulling back because of the flushing ability. You kind of gather the cards in your hand, gather the cards that you need in your hand in a lot more faster. So sometimes it's just like, oh, you target my Karmi, whatever, I have like 3 more in my hand. Easy. Not a problem if you destroy my rear guard. So that is the core of that deck. So that's really just a wrap up for how the central wrap up on the Pacifica build, and basically kind of clears up some questions because a lot of people ask me why I don't run Lena. It's just that comparably to Pacifica, not as good. Even in many ways, also because I like. It's not just because I like lollies and my fetish for them, but yeah. Okay, so that wraps up for Pacifica. So I am gonna move on to the last build, which I actually don't have a deck for, but let's imagine that I do have a deck for a Reindeer. In fact, so what the Reindeer build really does is, so for people who don't know her effect, she's one of those she's one of those Vanguard that when you trigger another grade 3, you get a benefit for triggering, so bonus effect in a sense. So her grade 3, so her ability is when she triggers a grade 3 Bermuda Triangle card, you can choose a card in the field, bounce them back in your hand. So as I talked about in the Pacifica build, you can bounce these kind of cards back in your hand, giving you advantage. So you can get card advantage by bouncing Karmis or Rock Girl Reels. But more so, her ability also allows you to place another Bermuda Triangle card back on the field. So this actually gives you additional attack. So you can bounce this, activate her effect, and then put it back on the field. OP. And then if you're starting to so that's a grade 3 ability, and I kind of consider the Reindeer build more like the budget build, not just because, well, this is more like intended for budget build because it is the common Vanguard, the common card in the whole series in the extra box. So there are a lot of ways to play this actually. So a lot of general builds that I've seen from Japanese players. is that they like to run Forest and Karmi, or Rock Grow Real. So one of the two, but as I said, I do prefer Rock Karmi a lot more because of the higher attack base and just helps you reach the numbers a lot easier. So basically, you have you're kind of forced to, as like Pacifica, you're forced to use the side with regards to attack first, because if you trigger grade 3, you can possibly stand your cards, or yeah, stand your cards, bounce back, put back, and this applies pressure because when you hit, of course, you can bounce another card. But of course, comparably to to the Pacifica Build, there's less pressure because of just the variety you can run in it, because Raindeer doesn't really have, her effects just activates. Really, you don't need permission for your opponent. It just activates as long as you trigger some grade 3s. And if you run the grade 1 booster behind, which I don't prefer anyone to do, because this hits a maximum for 15. So unless you're playing a deck with only 10k Vanguards, then that's fine. But of course, there's a lot of 11k Vanguards and so on, right? So if you're only hitting 15 on your Vanguard, then not so helpful a lot of the times, because then your opponent can guard against you very easily, because 15, oh, I'm 11k Vanguard, I block for 10, you need 2 triggers to get through. Oh, look how easy it is to stop your attack. So of course, I'm not really going to talk about deck composition here, because that's kind of up to personal preference in a lot of sense. But talking about the different builds kind of gives you an idea how you might construct your deck. And one of the reasons I can talk about here, it's hard to build Raindeer deck sometimes, is because I don't really prefer running 10 grade 3s, but because if you have too many grade 3s in your hand, then you kind of screw yourself over, because you can't block anymore unless you run 4 perfect guards. But in a budget build, or a lot of times when people are playing a budget build, there's a high probability that they don't have perfect guards, unless you're one of those rich people who wants to play Raindeer and have perfect guards and Pearl Sisters. Then that's okay as well, because you would have to run 4 perfect guards if you're running over 8 grade 3s. So speaking of that, is that when there's 3 different grade 3 units in your deck, it's really hard to kind of fit them in sometimes. Especially, this is a core card, and this is kind of a core card in how you operate the deck. And of course, this is the core card because it's the ace of the Vanguard, and basically all the strategy revolves around her. So it doesn't really give you enough space to run these, so making setup really hard. And since it doesn't really have a Pacifica engine, then it makes it hard for you to set up your field. So that's one of the first disadvantage about this deck. But if we're talking about, actually that's like the main disadvantage for this deck. Other one is like 10k Vanguard and so on. But still, you can strategy doesn't really not much so much different from the Pacifica build, because you're still trying to beat your opponent by overwhelming them with a lot of hand advantage, and not as much pressure noticeably, because you don't have as much options in terms of making a forest as your Vanguard, or like a kind of giving the grade 1 booster version, so you lose the pressure for that. And the maximum is that, so this is not a pressure, of course, because there's any booster here. Well, actually, the thing is, if you do end up playing a 10k Vanguard, this is usually a very nice setup as well, because then if this hits, you can bounce, and if you have 2 of them here, oh look, this hits, I have 2, almost like 3 ways of bouncing this card, so high chance your opponent is forced to allow you to get your +1. Of course, this works better in Pacifica build, because if you're playing a 10k Vanguard, you basically have all the advantage in the world. because you can place 2 of them here, a Pearl Sister here, and basically a win-win situation in terms of pressure. Basically maximum pressure on your opponent. But of course, they're playing Reindeer, you don't really have it, but it doesn't really matter because her effect kind of lets you bounce cards anyway and gives you additional. So really the main objective here is to just stack a lot of grade 3s, get card advantage, attack more, but not the thing is just not specifically high numbers, and you really wouldn't try to incorporate a 4th variety of grade 3 in here, such as this one, which helps you hit high numbers easily. Like, this feels really hard to play now, so I don't suggest running. So maximum, I only suggest running 3 different types of grade 3 in your deck. I don't really like preferring running more than 3 for sure, because it becomes really hard to fit in. And the thing with grade 2 lineup is that when you do try to hit for higher numbers, because one of the big problems with Bermuda Triangle is that when you run a deck where you're trying to hit for bounce, where your main objective is to bounce cards like Karmi or Rio back in your hand, cards like this and okay, not sure where it is, but wait, here we go. Cards like this and this, which are basically beat sticks, right? Which you run in the Riviere Build, which are really good in the Riviere Build. You don't really run these in the Pacifica Build or the Reindeer Build or the Leno Build, because the main objective is to kind of bounce cards back in your hand. So even when you do play these type of cards, they come into play in a more late game situation where you're just aiming for damage now. Because half the time is that if you have one of these on the field, it means you don't have one of either this on the field or either that on the field, which can be bad sometimes. But of course, because of Reindeer's effect, sometimes it's fixable sometimes, because you can bounce your cards back in your hand. But generally, vanilla beaters, or beat sticks as I like to call them, you don't really want them there, because your main objective is to try and get hand advantage by using pressure. So setup is very important for this deck, which is also why at max I can kind of call it a lower A tier deck for all the different builds, with the Riviere Build being a bit higher than the others, because something like Kagero, well, actually everything's bad. Every deck is bad against playing Kagero, but especially Kagero we're speaking, or Narukami here, which can destroy units by retiring them. Destroying your setup is really devastating for this deck, for the Bermuda Triangle kind in general, just because if you don't have the like the good setup there to set up your pressures and all, then you're not really getting all the benefits from playing the clan. And that's really what the Riviere clan is about. Some cards I can point out or name out that are good for this is that if you do run the Force, I do kind of insist that you run, or you need to kind of run 1 or 2 of these, not too many, because this is kind of rare actually, because if you somehow manage to do this effect for a 3rd time, I think 1, 2, 3, 4. So yeah, 3rd time. Actually, you don't really need this, but in case you somehow run out of Soul Blasters to use for this card, then this will help you kind of recharge up ammo to use to pay for the cost. Yeah, basically, not very likely that you actually need to rely on this to use the cost. Is that so this card, when you play on the field, you soul charge 1, so basically kind of feel up for the different type of effects for Bermuda Triangle that uses Soul Blast effects. But because in the Reindeer Build, I also prefer running the starter, so she goes into Soul, so If you ride from 1 to 3, you have 3 and you activate once, bouncing one of these, you get an extra soul, so you can activate a second time. Okay, so yeah, if you need to do it for a third time somehow, or somehow you run out because you activate parallel too many times without the other counterpart, and you run out of soul somehow, then these are good. I would only suggest running like 2 at max, not too many. This is also another reason why running Pacifica is better over Lena, because you never run into the problem of not having enough souls and soul blast, like, because you're soul charging every turn, so you're never gonna run out of soul unless you do so many effects where you soul blast. But by that time you probably deck out. And some people do like to play Lena in this deck because at the later stages, when you, or it's kind of like a backup plan when you have too many grade 3s in your hand and you can't shuffle them out, you would rather just ride Lena instead of Reindeer, because this would help you hit a higher number in general anyway, and you can still bounce your field to pick up some advantage from what you missed out by having too many grade 3s in your hand. But still not exactly that great in my opinion. Like, some people like it, yeah, but yeah, Pacifica much better, or in my opinion anyway, because I don't want to offend people. So back to pointing out some cards that are kind of more or less helpful for a Reindeer deck, or point out that you may want to run. So definitely the Para Sister combo, because of her effect. You can bounce cards out, and you bounce cards and put them back. There are many times where you can actually just let's say if you attack with this and you have Prey here, this has not attacked yet, you trigger a grade 3. Okay, bounce this back in your hand, play it on the hand, play it on the field again. Now target her. Now she gets a +1 if she hits the Vanguard. And let's say you're really OP and you get another grade 3. Oh look, a full field. But of course, double checking 2 grade 3s are not always the case. Like, not that great either sometimes, but can be helpful because you can do additional attacks. So definitely the Pearl Sister in the Reindeer deck is do run them if you have them, but a lot of people. But of course, when you're running the Pearl Sisters and the Perfect Guards and so on, then your deck's not really a budget deck anymore. But ignoring that, then a Reindeer build is actually still best function when you have the Pearl Sisters and basically all the hollow cards in the extra box. So yeah, so not much of a budget deck in the end, really. Another card to point out, not so surprising, really talked about it already, is Rock Girl Rio. Just cause when you really, like, I don't run too many of these in both decks, or if I build a Reindeer deck I wouldn't run too many just because of the lower base attack, but because you do wanna, it is kind of the main objective, or what you're trying to do in general when you play the deck. You do try and run a bit more of cards variation of this card, so you can actually launch the effect at more consistency. So for my Pacifica deck, I have 6 cards in total, basically 4 of these and 2 that can use this effect. So I'm not really afraid of not being able to trigger it half the time, because I'm pretty sure along with Pacifica's effect of flushing in, I will be able to pull at least 1 out of the deck. And basically this is the same thing apply for the Reindeer deck, is that if you want to trigger this type of effect, because on hit effects are hard to get off, and because you do need the card that lets you on hit bounce a card back on the hand, and this card, and one of these, it does make it difficult to set up sometimes. As I said, really huge setup requirement for the client. Somewhat easier on the Reindeer sometimes, because if you sack a grade 3 you get to bounce it, but of course you don't know if you're gonna sack grade 3 or not, so not as consistent as I would like to say, because you do have to sack hard. And I didn't show this earlier, but this is the perfect. Okay, I don't know where I left off, but next 20 minutes now. Probably not the full video, but anyway. So I didn't really show this card before, but this is the perfect card for this clan, and definitely run them. Like I say 4 in the Reindeer deck for sure, because if you're running only 8 grade 3s, running 3 is also good, but my preference is 4 perfect guard for basically any deck. And I do run 4 of these in the Pacifica build and the Riviere build, but I basically run 4 perfect guards in like any deck. So yeah, but if you run more, let's say if you run 10 grade 3s, then definitely run 4, because you'll end up with a lot of grade 3s in your hand and you won't really know how to get rid of them unless you play them all in the field. Which at that point your opponent really wouldn't attack your rear guards anymore, because they would, if they're keeping track of your hand, then they would know you have a hand of 4 grade 3s, so they wouldn't really bother attacking your rear guards anymore. And to really flush them out, you need to use perfect guards. So going back towards cards that I like to list out is here's another card. I'm not really sure her name, but it's something like Intel Mermaid, whatever. Anyway, so I guess it's just the recruiting, but well, that kind of makes sense. Inside joke, I guess. So her ability is the same as Reindeer ability. Is basically she's the grade 2 version. So if you drive check a grade 3, you get to choose a card and bounce back and do this whole Reindeer thing. So you get to bounce it back your hand and you place it out again and you can attack again. Or of course if you have something like that, or at grade 2 you wouldn't have that, but if let's say if you have Rock Girl Rio, bounce that back in your hand and +1. Assuming that you have the counter blast, which more or less there's a very high chance that you would have it. But if not, just do an additional attack. That's still good at early game because it does give you some pressure. So I don't run too many of these because at the grade 2 stage, at the grade 2 lineup, really, you have a lot of different cards you need to run. Like, you need to run the Pearl Sisters, which if you really want to get them off more consistently, and because you can only run that many 4s in your deck, you would run 4 of them because you want to set up for your field for bouncing the Carmies and the Rock Girl Reel. So that's why running 4 is a good idea. So basically when you have those 4, and then I usually like to run Aqua, or I like to run at least 3 Aqua in this deck, or deck that I would build, or deck I have built before already but took it apart. I would prefer running more. Instead of running more of this, I would run more Aqua, and the reason is really because that this is really one turn, so kind of a one turn wonder. So if you have it, you can ride it and try and get the bonus. But because of the 10k base for this, especially because this deck doesn't guarantee as much hand advantage as Pacifica could. Because in general, Pacifica, with a decent setup and the way you can flush out the cards to set up the field up faster, it does end up with a lot more hand advantage. So you want a 10k base at grade 2 because you also only have a 10k base at grade 3. Without that much of a guarantee hand advantage kind of thing. You don't really want to get rushed down at the grade 2 stage, where when you have a 9k, you can actually get easily beat down. Like, and there's a lot of different kind of effects that not really to your advantage when you're 9k Vanguard. Like Wingo Brave, Blaster Blade, Wingo Brave combo when you have a 9k, not so good. When you have 10k, easily blocked, easily shut down. And basically, yeah, 10k just makes the defense life for you a lot easier, and really this is the same reasoning in the Pacifica build that I choose to run more top idle Aqua, because it's make guarding a lot easier. And the other reason is because, like I said, or like I just demonstrated, the end result of your setup is that you don't really want to have a lot of beaters on the side anyway. So there's really no point in running flutes, because more or less you don't really want it on the field anyway, unless you're playing Riviere. But so if you have that kind of selection, you don't really want to ride an 8k Vanguard, and I can guarantee you don't want to ride 8k Vanguard. People can rush you down so hard if they have the resources to, and it makes your guarding life like 10 times harder. And because setting up is slower in this deck, you definitely don't want to get rushed down at the early stage. And then those are more or less the cards that I pointed out you can run. More of the other cards are more or less kind of preference, such as this card here. This is basically the Dark Cat of this clan. So when you play it on the field, both players can draw a card. Basically tech. I don't really like running this type of card because that's just my personal preference. Like, a lot of people like to run these. And I also notice a lot of Japanese players and how they build their deck. Like, I find that Japanese players, they really like Dark Cat. Like, they put a Dark Cat everywhere. Like, I look at a lot of tournament builds on different clans, and like, they shove Dark Cats just about in any deck, really. As long as the clan has one, they really like to run it. But yeah, I don't like this card because certainly it does give me an advantage by drawing a card, but it also gives my opponent an advantage by allowing them to draw a card. And it's just my preference that I don't really enjoy the idea of letting my opponent getting an extra card or giving them an advantage. But it is helpful in this deck in a lot of sense because of the heavy setup requirement. This could help you get the card that you need to set up your field properly. But basically, this is more of a player's preference kind of thing. So other text I won't really talk about is that there's this card, and for those of you who know, this is the error mode of the clan. So when you hit, ditch a card and draw a card. Those are most of the variety of this clan, really. Okay, so I'm gonna grab a drink of water first because my voice is drying out really hard. Okay, so there are some cards that I like to talk about that I don't really prefer anybody, or more or less I consider them kind of like the trash card of the clan, or that you shouldn't really bother running any of these. So first of them, the first one is this card, and then the second card is basically the clone of that card in 3-1 version. So this is Blazer's Pleasure, and this is White Coral, whatever. They both have the same effect basically, and it's a pretty bad ability. So its ability is when it's put onto when it's called out. So when you call this card, you can choose a Bermuda triangle unit and give them additional 2k attack. Basically, I wouldn't bother running any, like, kind of trashy, because okay, so I can become an 8k booster or a 10k attacker for one turn. Okay, why don't I just run top out Aquas and whatnot, or 7k boosters, because that can guarantee a better number for basically the entire game. Or you can argue with the like, oh, but I can, because I'm good, I can trigger sacks on grade 3s and bounce these back and place them back out and target other units and give them additional 2Ks. Well, okay, then I congratulate you because you're a big sack, but like, okay, so you have a shitty field now. What are you going to do with an 8K unit if you don't have an 8K booster behind there? Or what can you do with a 6K booster unit? Which, unless you have a 10K attacker or whatnot, then you're hitting for some pretty bad numbers. And this goes to say for especially in the OCG meta, like hitting for 16 is not exactly good enough anymore. So especially when only a 10K Vanguard. So when you run out of 10K beaters or whatnot, then when you're forced to play a 9K or anything lower, because really there's only that many 10K beat sticks out there, unless you play grade 3, then you're hitting for a bad number, really. And same argument really for TCG is that there's a lot higher chance that you end up hitting for setting up some for really bad rolls, and basically setting up for really bad rolls, and that there's no guarantee that you can pull them back to your hand, but you can use this as intercept, but still not so good if you're forced to, when you really don't have that many units. Let's say if you don't have especially a lot of hand advantage, then not the best card to be running. When you have a lot of card advantage, maybe a decent card to run, but still there's better cards to run, especially like the way you would set up your deck is that there's a lot better cards to run than these. So some people do like to run these, and I can tell you that it's a really shitty idea, really. They look nice and stuff, but that's about it. But you know, really, majority of this clan looks nice, so it doesn't really give a good reason to run these. Well, I guess it does, really. If you really like it, can't really stop people from running it, but like, just saying, game mechanic wise, these aren't really good cards. So that's really all I have to talk about the Riviere build. And then, one I didn't talk about. Okay, so this is the last starter of this deck, of this clan, and she's basically the generic grade 3 searcher. So you can put this in your assault for a counterblast 1, top 5 cards, and find a grade 3 and add it into your hand. Not so good really in when compared to this one, window. Basically, this helps you. This is kind of like saying, here, top 5 card and see if you can sack a grade 3, and that will give you a break even. Or maybe you'll just -1 because you don't have a grade 3. Window here basically more consistent in breaking even, because most Vanguard starters are just break even, and really you really want to break even with this type of card. So grade 3 searchers are sometimes not that great. It does help people. It does help with grade stuck and whatnot, but I generally don't prefer them unless the deck kind of requires it, because of there's just the chances of being able to get nothing, and then that kind of just makes the starter do not much. And also, you don't like to use the effect, it's only a 4K booster, so not very helpful. So that really covers about all the different types of Bermuda Triangle deck, and ends the discussion. I can kind of talk about the last one, is that some people talked about an even more budget deck than Raindeer is actually just running a combination of forests and colonies, and basically the objective of the deck is still really the same as just trying to. It's actually the same as Pacifica, but So it's more like a budget build Pacifica deck with no Pacifica. So instead of recreating a forest clone on the Vanguard, you basically just ride forest, and then you attack something, so last 2, basically bounce cards, bounce Karmi or Rock Girl Rio, so on, and that basically just does the same thing as Pacifica, really. But of course, like I said, I guess if you're running this as the main Vanguard, you would run other forests to put on this side, or you would run the Pearl Sisters. But when you're running the Pearl Sisters and whatnot, it's not really a budget deck anymore, so might as well go all the way, right? But that is an option for some of people who want to know how to make a budget build for Bermuda Triangle, is that you could use Forest as the main Vanguard, just team up with Karmi. Basically, then your deck can be made out of commons when that happens. But then I would rather play Reindeer instead of the Forest build if I was going to play a budget build. But yeah, preference. So that kind of ends the talk of Bermuda Triangle, and this took more or less 60 minutes, which way longer than I anticipated, but I hope this is helpful to a lot of people on who are playing Bermuda Triangle or interested in it. And I am sorry that it took so long, because there is a lot to cover. And another thing is that if you guys like this kind of discussion or analyzation of decks, then I can do some more in the future for different clients with a bunch of different builds for their decks. Like I can only name Pale Moon in my head because they do have three different builds, so on. So yep, if you guys have any more questions, then put them in the comments below, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. As well as if there's anything you guys like about this video, place that in the comments as well. Or if you guys don't like the video, I would like to hear some feedback, because this is my first time doing such a long video on deck discussioning and so on. So yeah, my voice is all corpse, like not like it's corpse, not like it's not coarse as usual, but yeah, I hope you guys liked the video. Bye.